Well, it is my distinctive pleasure now to introduce to you my favorite Attorney General, and he just happens to be from Texas, Ken Paxton.
Thank you very much. Well, as you know, I'm from Texas, so I have to give you a welcome from a Texas elected official. So welcome to Texas. And know that it is hot here in August. It's not hot here all the time, so this is not the way it always is. But I really was going to see if I could ask a favor. My wife is a state senator in Texas. She is unfortunately on a flight back from Austin from doing some legislative work down there. And so she couldn't be here. She's just going to miss my speech. And so I was wondering if you guys would participate. I could just do a little video so she'd believe me that I was here. All right, here we go. Start over here. Wave to Senator Paxton. Thank you. All right. So a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to do something that was kind of really special to me. And that was to do a graduation commencement ceremony at my son's graduation. So I have 4 children. He's now 29, so it was a few years ago. And so when I started off, I was like, what do you say to commencement speech? And I started thinking, well, I'll just maybe think about what happened at my commencement speeches. So I started thinking about high school, and I couldn't remember even being there. So I was like, well, okay, well, I went to Baylor University, and I thought, well, maybe college. Yeah, Sikkim Bears. And I remembered being there, but I don't remember a speaker. So I said, that's not going to help. Well, so fortunately, I got my MBA at Baylor. So I was thinking, well, I went to graduate school. Surely I can remember the speaker. And I sort of remember the speaker, but not what they said. And then finally, so I had one more chance. I went to the University of Virginia Law School, which is on a beautiful campus designed by Thomas Jefferson. And I remember that ceremony except for the speaker. And so I was thinking, you know, what are the odds that they're going to remember anything I said? Like 0. So I gave them a really quick speech and talked about what octogenarians, when they're in their 80s, obviously, what they wish they'd done with their lives different. And there were like 3 things: reflect more, take more risks, and leave more things behind. And I said, listen, you all probably, although those are important, because obviously these people have already lived, and that's probably really good advice, you're probably not going to remember that. So just remember one thing: wear sunscreen. And then I walked off. So today, I'm not going to give you a bunch of things. Somebody wrote a speech for me, my staff wrote a speech with 19 different points. I'm only going to talk about 2, because those are the 2 things that I think are the most important as it relates to what I do. And I think those 2 things are fundamental to what we need to do as Matt Schlapp says, save this country. And so the first thing is, there are 2 words that I'm kind of afraid to say, because you can get a lot of trouble in America for saying these 2 words. And so I'm a little hesitant because, I mean, you can get state bar complaints for talking about these 2 words. You can get prosecuted for talking about these 2 words. You can get criticized and canceled, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it: election fraud. So Texas, unlike some of these other states, actually fought election fraud in the last election. We had 12 lawsuits, and I was stunned by the number of lawsuits that we had. We had 12 lawsuits in very liberal counties that were filed against us by very liberal groups, and it became very clear that this was an orchestrated effort from somewhere outside the state by somebody that had a lot of money, but we didn't know who. And the genius of it was designed to make sure that mail-in ballots were mailed out to as many people as possible in violation of Texas law. There's only 4 reasons that you can get a mail-in ballot in Texas. It's designed to make sure that people don't commit fraud. And so the legislature has granted exceptions because normally you have to show a photo ID, which makes it much more secure. So in this case, we have these exceptions, and these judges in very liberal counties ordered that mail-in ballots in Bexar County, which is San Antonio, Travis County, which is Austin, Harris County, which is Houston, that they be mailed out. We're talking about 2.5 million ballots in Harris County and several million in these other counties. You can add the numbers up. It would have been 5, 6, 7 million, who knows how many. And they just get mailed indiscriminately. And the problem with that is that there's no check on fraud. They say, well, there's no proof of fraud. Of course. Because the way it normally works, when you do a mail-in ballot, normally you have to apply for it. You have to fill out something and sign it. So then when you get your ballot that you requested, you sign the envelope, put your ballot in, and then they compare signatures. It's not as good as a photo ID, but it is some check. It is at least something. Whereas if they just mail them out, guess what? There was never a signature. There's nothing to verify, and guess what? There's no proof of fraud. And so that it's very easy to claim there's no fraud. So I realized that we had a fight on our hands, and the genius of this strategy is that we had to win every case. Because if we lost in Harris County, that's 2.5 million ballots. To give you an idea, Trump won by 620,000-ish votes. So you can see what that could have done. And so we fought, and I even called the president and said, hey, if you lose, it's going to be because of mail-in ballots. We fought, and guess what? We won every single case. So I was sitting there on election night, watching the election as I often do. Things were going well for Trump. And then, as you well know, in 6, 7 states, they stopped counting for the first time in my life. And suddenly it took 3 days, and in every one of those states, they were turned around over a 3-day period. We're not supposed to notice that that's unusual or that might seem strange. We're supposed to just accept that that was perfectly normal and everything went fine. But I knew right then what was going on because I knew that would have happened in Texas, and we would have lost Texas. And I can give you an example. Georgia decided to sign consent decrees 4 years ago, or the previous election, now 6 years ago. They, in Texas, had about the same margin of victory for Trump. Of course, this time, Georgia went for Biden by, a few thousand votes, and Trump won ours by over 600,000, 8, 9%. So that was the difference between fighting and not fighting. Well, then, of course, after that, we sued several states of this. We were not allowed to proceed with that according to the Supreme Court. So we never got our day in court, which is really unusual. And yet, Texas still is at risk. And you would say, why? We fought it off. We're at risk because our Court of Appeals, our Court of Criminal Appeals, and in Texas, we have 2 sets of courts. We have criminal courts, and we have our Texas Supreme Court, which deals with civil matters. The Court of Criminal Appeals deals with criminal matters. They're all Republican, nine Republicans. And for some odd reason, and by the way, most Republicans don't even know who's on that court. And as a backdrop, George Soros has done a very good job in these liberal counties, Travis, Austin, Harris, and Bear, which is San Antonio, getting Soros-elected DAs in position. In other words, there were Democrats there. They were Democratic counties, but I used to work with them. They all changed out. And the question is why? Because he doesn't want people prosecuted for crimes, including election fraud. And then suddenly, out of the blue, our Texas Court of Criminal Appeals struck down a statute. Of course, this was 2 days after the filing deadline for anybody to run against them. They're up every, there's 9 of them. They're up every 6 years, so 3 each time. 2 days after the filing deadline, December 15th, they came up with a ruling striking down a 1951 statute passed by the legislature, duly, in place, and agreed upon for over 70 years, saying that the Texas Attorney General could no longer prosecute voter fraud because I'm in the executive branch, and I'm not allowed in court, which means that I wouldn't be allowed in court on civil cases, which means if they're right, and they said it was separation of powers, because I'm in the executive branch, I can't be in court, which means that no attorney general could be in court, which means no state could have an attorney general in court. Now, if you think that makes sense, you might explain that to me later, but this came out of a court that nobody knows anything about. It was 8-1. So now, guess who gets to prosecute, supposedly, our election fraud cases? The DAs. And you can see how few votes they need. Had we not stopped it, we would have already been in the category of Georgia or Pennsylvania or Arizona. So just so you know, election fraud is an ongoing issue for us. And I need the Texas legislature, and I'll need the governor's help to come back and pass legislation to address this and continue that fight. So election fraud, if we don't solve that problem, if we're not all diligent, that is the strategy. And if we lose Texas, obviously it would be very hard to elect a Republican president. And so that, in my opinion, there's no more important issue to focus on for us than election fraud. Second, is, I don't know, you might have heard Texas occasionally sues the Biden administration. I think I started when Obama was in office. I had 27 months to deal with him, and we sued Obama 27 times in 27 months. And we won. We won about 80% of those. With Biden, in a year and a half, we've sued him 31 times, and we won about 93% of those. So, and so a lot of people wonder, why do we sue the federal government so much? And the question is really answered relatively simply. And let me just point to, it's on different topics, but the one that we seem to be most suing on is immigration. We have 11 lawsuits on immigration. And from my standpoint, on the border, we're dealing with a partnership between the cartels and the federal government. And you might say, what do you mean? There's no contract. There is an unwritten contract, and here's the contract. Biden walks into office, says on day one, we're not deporting anybody. We sued him on day 6, which, by the way, I think is the fastest any president's been sued by a state ever. And this agreement goes like this. He sends that message to the cartels. Bring as many people here as you can. They don't have to run from Border Patrol anymore. Bring them to us. We're on the same team now. You can make $8,000 to $12,000 per person. You guys will make billions. You can now transport your drugs more easily. Of course, that means more Americans die, particularly children. Drug overdoses are up over 30% from when Trump was in office. That's an acceptable consequence of this policy or change. And basically, the Biden administration has ignored the law. They don't care about federal law if they don't like it. They're ignoring their constitutional role. And they've got this deal with the cartels. Bring them to the border, not anywhere on the border. Bring them to Border Patrol, hand them off to us. We'll take the handoff, and then we'll transport them around the rest of the country to mostly Republican states. That's the deal. And so this is just one example of our 31 lawsuits. And the question is, why does all of that matter? It's not just immigration. It's actually bigger than immigration. It's about this little thing called the Constitution. And it matters. It matters that, yeah, you should applaud. That really does matter. Our founders, if you'll remember, didn't trust government. And they separated the branches, gave them different roles. And there's checks and balances. And they left the remaining power that they didn't explicitly give to the federal government to the states. Joe Biden clearly doesn't believe that. Actually, I don't know what he believes. I don't know that he knows what's going on. But I do know that his people do, whoever they are. And that's what our fight is about, whether we're going to have a federal government that basically funnels all the power to one branch of government, and we lose this thing called the U.S. Constitution. And so that's why people say, well, don't you like this particular law? Isn't it good that it's doing this? It doesn't matter if it's good. That's not how it's supposed to be done. If we let the president make up laws, which is what he's doing now, he's looking at federal law, and he's saying, I don't do that. I'm the president. I don't have to do what Congress tells me to do. I don't have to build the wall, even though money was appropriated. I can do what I want to do. And if we have that type of presidency, we will lose the very freedoms that our founders put in place for us. And I guess, yeah. I guess I would want to end with something I think is important to remember. It's something that I don't know that many kids in school get to read anymore. It's called the Declaration of Independence. And it set up the real foundation for what the founders really thought. And what that document says, as you probably well remember, is that these rights do not come from the president. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They don't come from the states. They come from God. And so these are rights that are ours. These are rights that are ours, and if the government tries to take them from us, that document says we have a right to fight back. So that we are not beholden to the government is beholden to us. And that is really important that most people don't realize. And so I think it's really important that you all are here today. I think it's really important because I know that if you all are not out there fighting and we're not spreading our message of freedom and that the Constitution really does matter, much as Ronald Reagan said, we won't be passing this on to the next generation. And this experiment in freedom, there's nobody else like us. This experiment in freedom is gone. It won't be there for our children. It won't be there for our grandchildren. And it's closer than we think. We can tell that with election fraud. They are working very hard to take that from us illegitimately. So I'm going to finish with a story about a guy that you might have heard of. He was a Texan, Davy Crockett. So Davy Crockett, pretty famous in Texas, and he actually came from Tennessee. He had been in Congress. He got booted out for standing up, for fighting. He ran again. He was in Congress for a while, and he got booted out again. And then he said, you know what? I'm just going to say what he said, quote, "Y'all can go to hell, I'm going to Texas." And you might think, because it's so hot in Texas in August, that it is hell, but it is not. We love Texas because it is a bastion of freedom. And that spirit of Davy Crockett lives. And that man went to the Alamo to defend independence and freedom for Texans and died. And that may be what we're called to do. We have an opportunity in this moment in history. God put us all here and gave us an opportunity to make a difference or not. And history will be written about what we did, and I'm convinced that the people in this room and the people like us have an opportunity to continue the freedom that our founders believed in or not. And they'll write about us someday. We can sit in comfort, we can enjoy our retirement, we can focus on our jobs and our families, all of that important. But in the end, if we're not diligent about this fight and don't take seriously the fact that they are trying to take this from us, we won't pass the country on that was given to us by these amazing men and women that founded this country. So I want to encourage you and thank you for being here, for caring about this, and especially for coming to Texas. God bless. Thank you all very much.